I ruined my ex-boyfriend's life more than 20 years ago, and I have just made sure that it stays ruined forever. When I was in college in the 1990s, I met Daniel through mutual friends. He was 23 at the time. He had already finished his studies and was planning to move across the country to continue his education in graduate school. I was also planning to move with friends to a city that was only about an hour and a half away from where he was going. We had so much in common. We fell in love and it felt like destiny. Both of us were planning to move over 4,000 kilometers and almost to the same place. He had 2 sisters and a younger brother. They were all great people and I became friends with them right away. Since Daniel was in graduate school and I was working, I usually traveled to see him on weekends. He rented a house with 2 other people from his program. We were young, had almost no money, but we had fun. We went on cheap dates and spent a lot of time at his place, where he bred and sold small animals. Daniel was a graduate student in animal sciences, so being around animals was normal for him, and I liked it. I met and became friends with the wife of his academic supervisor, Susan, who was about 50 years old and worked in the university's administrative department. She was a wonderful woman, and we often had lunch together when I visited on weekends. Daniel was a teaching assistant, and I met other people from the program and made friends with them even faster than he did. After about 2 years of dating, one day we were lying in bed at his place partially undressed, when he suddenly said that he was bothered by the fact that I had gained weight and that it was becoming harder for him to feel attracted to me. He didn't say a word about my health, only that he found me unattractive. I sat up and said, "Well, then maybe you should make sure I have proper food when I come visit you on weekends, instead of just crackers with cheese." Even at 23, I didn't tolerate that kind of nonsense. I had gained at most 4 kilograms since we met and was still wearing the same clothes, about a US size 6. I wasn't going to argue. This was his problem, not mine. So I calmly asked, "And what is your decision?" He stared at me blankly and said, "Well, I think you should try to lose weight." I replied, "No, I'm not going to do that." "So what are you going to do?" I asked. He said, "Well, probably nothing. I just wanted to say how I feel." I said, "Great, thanks." I got dressed, went to sleep, and the next day, as usual, went back home. We continued seeing each other, and about 3 months later he called and said he wanted to break up after almost 3 years together. The reason, and I quote, "You don't know enough about science." He felt that he couldn't talk to me about his work without using common animal names instead of scientific ones. I told him that this was bullshit and asked what the real reason was. He insisted that this was the real reason. A month later he showed up to return some of my things, and I demanded the truth. Finally, he admitted that he had been dating one of his undergraduate students. Let's call her Lily. She was 19. He was 26 and he was her instructor. I screamed at him to get out, and my roommate threatened to throw him out of the second-floor window if he didn't leave. He left. When the door closed behind him, my rage turned into hysterical laughter. I had met Lily a couple of times. Once, at a barbecue at Daniel's place, she spilled something on her pants. Daniel asked if I could lend her a pair of sweatpants. I couldn't because I wore a size 46 and she wore a size 56. There is absolutely nothing wrong with that. But the point is, I suddenly realized something. He had made comments about my weight so that I would break up with him myself because he was a coward. He clearly liked curvy women. But seriously, saying something like that in the middle of the night when I lived about 150 kilometers away, and we had just been intimate, what did he think would happen? That I would snap, break up with him on the spot, and drive an hour and a half home in the middle of the night? Anyway, I wrote to his housemates. I wanted to tell them that we had broken up, that they had always been kind to me, and to thank them for their friendship. Both of them admitted that they knew about Lily and had even demanded that Daniel tell me the truth, otherwise they would do it themselves. That was why he came up with that stupid excuse. You don't understand science. One of the roommates, a very sweet and very handsome guy named Alex, offered to bring me my things that he had collected around the house. He suggested that I come over for the weekend. We would drink and have fun, all the things Daniel never wanted to spend money on. I agreed. I arrived and Alex let me in while Daniel wasn't home. I photographed all of Daniel's animals, because even though I wasn't a graduate student, I was observant. I knew that he had an animal that was on the endangered species list. He wasn't breeding it. It was a rescue animal that was prohibited from being released into the wild. He needed to file paperwork and pay a $25 fee, but he always refused. He didn't want the government interfering in his business. I photographed that animal, the breeding conditions, and another animal that couldn't legally be kept in that region at all. It was in an aquarium right by the window and was visible from the street. Then Alex and I went into town, came back early around midnight so that Daniel and Lily, who were watching TV, would see me in a short dress, drunk, and Alex practically carrying me. I spent the night in Alex's room. He was a gentleman, but he deliberately walked out into the hallway wearing only boxers several times. We laughed loudly and pretended to moan so they could hear us. In the morning when I was leaving, Daniel said that I didn't need to behave like in front of him. I was slowly eating a donut in a wrinkled dress with messy hair, while Alex was glowing and kissed me on the top of my head. Lily sat there embarrassed, not knowing where to look. I said, "Enjoy my leftovers," and left. At the time I thought that was my petty loud revenge. It wasn't. The next day I developed the film, The Good Old Days, and called the State Department of Wildlife and Fisheries. I reported the animals in the house, possible overcrowding of bred animals, and the 2 animals that could not legally be kept in that region at all. I asked how to properly file a report. It turned out that Daniel was disliked by both his classmates and his housemates. Me they liked. Alex suggested that together with the other roommate, they file a complaint with the university about a teaching assistant sleeping with his student and showing favoritism. That night when we went bar hopping, they told this story to everyone they knew. They made sure that all the women in his classes knew that he was sleeping with Lily. The program was small, so the news that he had cheated and was now dating a student spread quickly. Alex and the second roommate also made sure everyone knew they had filed complaints, because they were sick of his arrogant bullshit. When I sent the full report and photographs to the state wildlife inspectors, I called my friend Susan, the wife of Daniel's academic supervisor. She already knew about our breakup and his stupid excuse for it. I told her that he had admitted to sleeping with a student. I had his messages where he admitted it himself, and I sent them to Susan. She was extremely upset. She said she would make sure it was investigated and immediately told her husband, Daniel's academic supervisor, while we were still on the phone. Speaking of investigations, a couple of weeks later, Alex called me, extremely excited, and said that inspectors from the department were already at the house, confiscating animals. He told them that he would gladly provide any information they needed. Lily was there and told the inspectors that, as far as she knew, all the animals belonged to her boyfriend Daniel and that they were all legal. That removed responsibility from Alex and the second roommate. One animal was kept in the backyard, and Daniel was subtly told that a neighbor had reported it. The inspectors also knew to look through the back window to see a much more problematic animal, one that could almost never be legally kept in that region. Since Alex's name was on the lease, he was allowed to let the inspectors into the house for inspection. All the animals were kept in common areas. The inspectors stayed there for several hours and then returned with a warrant to confiscate all the animals and search Daniel's room. Alex and the second roommate let them into their rooms without any issues, and all suspicion was removed from them. Lily apparently couldn't reach Daniel by phone, and eventually went to the university to look for him. This was before mobile phones were common. It was a good day. The only animals that weren't taken were a few guppy fish in an aquarium. Now the important part. Graduate students need grants. Most funding for animal-based research comes from the federal government. Daniel had just received a grant from the U.S. Environmental Protection Agency around the same time we broke up. I called them and asked, how do you report that someone with a federal grant is under investigation for illegally keeping endangered animals? Long story short, he lost the grant and had to repay everything that had already been spent, almost $30,000. He would never again be eligible for a federal grant. He avoided prison on state charges because the animals were in good condition, but he lost all of his breeding animals worth about $1,000 because they were confiscated during the investigation along with the 2 illegal ones. In the end, he had to pay a fine of $15,000, and the 2 animals were sent to the nearest wildlife rehabilitation center. For several years when I happened to be in the area, I visited them. The university revoked his scholarship and fired him from teaching due to inappropriate relations with a student. Somehow he avoided being expelled. But I was always amazed that he didn't even try to hide his relationship with Lily, and was so arrogant that he didn't wait just 4 weeks for her to finish his course before dating her publicly. According to university rules, he would have been in the clear then. He would no longer be her instructor, and she would simply have had to avoid any classes where he was a teaching assistant. That always makes me laugh. A few months later, I wrote to his sisters and told them that I missed them, because Daniel had dumped me after trying to call me fat and cheating on me, and I felt awkward reaching out sooner. The sisters replied that he had told the family that I broke up with him because of the long-distance relationship. I forwarded them the letter Daniel had written after the breakup, where he talked about how he had fallen in love with Lily, apologized, but claimed that it was the truth, that I couldn't match his intellectual level, and that this made Lily more attractive to him. Daniel managed to convince his father to pay for 1 more year of school, so he could get a master's degree instead of a doctorate. I stayed in touch with his sisters and brother via email and later through social media. Overall, I let the situation go. I had taken my revenge on Daniel and made new friends. Susan became almost like an aunt to me and I moved on. I earned my own master's degree. And do you know what my field is? Helping scientists and doctors explain their research to ordinary people. You know, idiots like us who don't remember all those scientific names. I swear it happened by accident. I didn't plan it, but I love it and work with everyone, from rural doctors and nurses to pharmaceutical companies, museums, government institutions, and film and TV producers. I travel a lot, give lectures, and learn a huge amount about our planet and how everything works. About 20 years later, I was back in that city for work. I had a free evening and went out with colleagues to a bar. And guess who I ran into? Daniel. He was drunk, older, and very bitter. He recognized me immediately and came over. He started talking about how unfair life had been to him, how everyone had ruined his career, how his professors had betrayed him, how his roommates had destroyed his future, and how me had been the final nail in the coffin. He said that after everything that happened, no one would hire him in academia. He had tried to work in pet stores and small labs, but nothing ever worked out. Lily had left him a few years later. According to him, she wasn't that smart after all. He asked me what I was doing now. I told him. I told him about my degree, my work, my travels, my lectures, and how much I loved my job. He laughed and said, "So you're explaining science to idiots now?" I smiled and said, "Yes, and I'm very good at it." Then I leaned in and added quietly, "You know what the difference between you and me is?" He shook his head. "I understand science well enough to explain it simply, and I understand people well enough not to treat them like trash." He stared at me for a long time then looked away. I paid my bill, wished him a good night, and left. That was the last time I ever saw him. Story 2. My ex destroyed his own life. My ex-husband destroyed his own beautiful life. He was a walking problem. It didn't bother me that he had a bunch of chronic illnesses, but the fact that he categorically refused to take care of himself, that was the real problem. Especially when, because of his condition, I lost those few hours of sleep I could have managed. I worked for a terrible private security company that didn't care about its employees. I was the only field supervisor in the region. And in addition to my usual 40 hours a week, I was constantly called in for urgent assignments to cover unstaffed posts. This was during the height of the pandemic, and eventually 80 to 100 hours a week became normal for me. The pay was great, but I was utterly exhausted. At that time, my husband worked part-time, received disability benefits, and spent all his income on himself, video games and fast food. Despite the doctor's restrictions, while I was paying both his and my bills, the car loan, insurance, phone bills, and everything else, this went on for about 3 years and things just got worse. Even though I was supporting him financially, I still managed to pay off the car loan and save up for a house. Nothing particularly fancy. A 2-story house with an unfinished basement, plenty of space, a decent yard, a creek, and awesome neighbors who constantly invited us to drink and play pool. During the move, I was still working 80+ hours and could barely help with the packing, but I paid for the moving truck and dinner for everyone willing to help carry boxes. I also asked my husband to make sure everything was packed. He packed all his things, then the furniture, and anything that didn't fit in the truck, he just left behind, delaying the truck and returning it late. I had to call the company and explain the situation, and they kindly waived the fee, considering my circumstances. As a result, most of my stuff, my roommate's things, and my brother's belongings didn't fit in the truck. My brother went there every day after work, bringing a carload each time. I asked my ex to do the same and he agreed. After 3 weeks, I finally had a day off. I had worked 12 hours and planned to pack a few boxes and take them home. I walked into the house and saw that my ex had literally done nothing. 3 weeks he had claimed to be moving our stuff, and it was a lie. I completely lost it. My legs buckled from shock. I burst into tears right on the stairs. My roommate, who was also my best friend, came in right behind me and saw me there. He hugged me while I cried and promised to take a few days off to pack and move everything. He told me to go home and sleep, but I said I was already there, so I would at least pack a couple of boxes myself since my worthless husband lied about doing it. He helped me pack and I drove home. I didn't even bother unloading. I just collapsed on the bed and cried myself to sleep. Hours later, I woke up exhausted and went to the car to start unloading. My best friend was already there, unloading his car with a tired smile. He spent the whole day doing it. The sun was setting. Meanwhile, my husband sat in the basement messing around, breaking his promise. We still managed to move the stuff, but I had to extend the house rental by a week and pay a proportional amount, all because of his negligence. I became increasingly angry, and when we finally moved, I sat him down and told him how furious I was about his lies, laziness, and all the damage he had caused. In response, he started accusing me of all sorts of things, for example, that I didn't hug him passionately because of his illness. I snapped. I shouted that I didn't hug anyone passionately, not even myself, because I worked like hell to support his lazy ass and pay for his lifestyle while he spent all his money on fast food, which he shouldn't have, and video games, and then he did absolutely nothing around the house. No cooking, no cleaning, not even bothering to pack his things. He doesn't make my life easier, he makes it harder. I still clean up after him when he leaves dishes around and leaves stains on the carpet. So no, I don't want to hug him passionately if he doesn't do anything to deserve it. He stopped talking to me for 2 weeks and things only got worse. He didn't write, didn't speak, didn't answer calls, and at some point didn't even look in my direction. And yet, he was still living off my money. Eventually one day, I wrote to him asking why he was treating me this way. He ignored me. I asked a few more questions, nothing. Finally, I said that if he hated me so much, he should just get a divorce. The next day, he said he wanted a divorce. I asked why. He replied, "You don't do enough for me." Oh my God, what a ridiculous excuse. Let me put it this way. This idiot, the dumbest brainless person, said that. I exploded. I told him that I did everything for him, paid for everything so he could live comfortably, that I gave him a roof over his head, food, money in his account, because by that point I was even giving him extra when he asked, that I took time off for him and that I literally did everything for him. And this is how he pays me back. I became very quiet, pressed myself against his chest, pointed a finger at his face, and said that if he wants a divorce, he would file it. And if he even hinted that I should sell the house, which I had paid for, I would destroy him. I would hire an expensive lawyer, start the longest court battle of his life, and take every penny he had ever earned plus legal fees. Then I kicked him out. He moved out, said he was going to his family in another city, and asked me to file for divorce myself. I filed in my own district because it was closer. He went crazy when he found out. He wanted me to file online and pay an extra $270 out of my own pocket, since he expected me to cover everything, but I refused. A few days later, I received a strange message from him out of character. I started arguing with him and then came the confession. It was his girlfriend. He had lied to me again and actually moved to New York. She lashed out at me, screaming in messages about how abusive I was. Anyway, we argued, and I told her I wouldn't talk to her anymore, and that I was filing for divorce in my district because I had already started the process and wasn't going to change it because he had lied. If he hadn't lied, I might have filed online, but now definitely not. Months passed and finally the hearing day arrived. She brought him to Georgia, and they were 15 minutes late. I knew this because I had arrived 15 minutes early. The clerk asked if I could contact him. I went outside to call and saw them arriving. I told him that she wouldn't be allowed inside due to COVID restrictions, but honestly I wouldn't have let her in anyway because I hate her. He nodded and we went upstairs. We spoke with the clerk and started the paperwork. I have basic legal knowledge, definitely more than him, due to my interest and experience, so I knew which questions to ask. I know how lazy this human being is. He hates doing anything that isn't absolutely necessary. So in front of the clerk, I reminded him that his things were still in my house and that I wanted him to take them. The clerk told him that anything left after a certain date would legally become mine, and he couldn't retrieve it without my consent. He asked if there was some workaround and I said, "No, you don't follow the rules and whatever remains will be lost." When we were still together, his blessed mother, may she rest in peace, even though her son grew up worthless, passed away. I adored that woman. She was a saint, and I wanted to keep something of hers to remember her by. He inherited her dining room rug. It wasn't worth much money, but it was a beautiful black and red antique. And I knew he wouldn't be able to pay for shipping, couldn't rent a truck, and couldn't fit it into his girlfriend's tiny crappy car. So while he cried and loaded his mother's things, the ones he had left when he first left, I told him I was taking the rug for myself. I said it calmly, without emotion. He tried to argue, but I pointed out the obvious and he gave in. He knew I was right. That rug is one of my favorite things. I started renovating our unfinished basement. Now the rug lies in a beautiful guest room. And now for the good news. I married my best friend, and we've been together for almost 4 years. For our 5th anniversary, he agreed to a ceremony because we had initially married quietly, with only 2 witnesses. And a small revenge story. I still have a folder with my ex's childhood drawings which he adores. I will keep it hostage until he reimburses me $400 for brand new tires I put on his car just weeks before he decided to divorce. It's been more than 4 years. Looks like I'll never give it back. And yes, I remind him about it every year. Well, that's it. Thank you for listening to both of these stories to the very end.